Samsung considers moving to Bing as default search engine. This is basically Samsung asking Google to pay up. Google needs to pay Apple iOS for default search engine, and paying Samsung for staying on Android with Google Search. Basically, Google is being squeezed left and right. So the only way to increase revenue or profits to satisfy the money they spend on Apple and Samsung. More ads on YouTube and Google Search. The more ads they serve, the worse UX they have. All while completely fail to compete against AWS or Azure.
I bet Microsoft will gladly match all of Google's offers here.
The frenemy status of Google Samsung is once again on display. Samsung probably hasn't been happy with the Google's continued Pixel phone push. But why is Google paying Apple to be the default search engine on iOS devices? It seems a waste of money, as Apple would be stupid to default to any other search engine given the lower search quality results. End users would notice if there was a result degradation and likely switch their default. Google seems to be playing the Intel Inside part without reaping the marketing benefits and only paying the traffic acquisition costs.
This is basically Samsung asking Google to pay up. True, but Samsung isn't known for user-friendly phones, and they often come with a lot of bloat. At some point it drives more and more users to Pixel.
Google still owns Android.
Most of Android is licensed under the Apache 2.0 license. So while the word owns is true in a technical legal sense, there is nothing to prevent anyone from forking it and doing their own thing. Unlike with GPL code, they don't even need to license their changes under the same license, as long as they abide the terms with respects to the original. Personally, I use Graphenias in order to Google without switching to the Apple ecosystem. No Google Play, you can install it, but I choose not to. FOSS apps only. I don't recommend it for everyone, but it made me not hate owning a smartphone for the first time since the mobile revolution passed my old grumpy self by.
I always thought that Google made a big blunder by not encroaching upon Microsoft's turf more aggressively. They should have tried to make a better desktop OS, just by Canonical or something, and then eat into Microsoft Office market share by releasing Google Office for desktop. Wait for an opportunity to emerge and then pounce. This is precisely what Microsoft did to Google. They had Bing running in the background for years, losing truckloads of money. Now that AI has upset the apple cart, they can use Bing to choke off Google's air supply. One of the reasons for Google getting so good early on was that they had oodles of usage data to test and improve their search functionality, forming a positive feedback loop. Now with deals such as this, Microsoft will have more data to tune their engine while Google is left on the sidelines. Let's just hope that the AI-driven search revolution does not produce a monopoly.
They kinda did that with Chromios plus Google Docs with offline mode. The problem for Google is that while it was a solid investment for Ms. to pursue cloud services to compete with Google, I don't think it would have been a good investment the other way around. Chrome is really the only desktop product that makes sense for Google because it pushes people into their ecosystem online. Creating something like a standalone OS or a standalone Office software would have gone in the wrong direction for Google, taking people off their site rather than taking people there. Also, on a total side note, if you told me 5 years ago that Bing would be a serious threat to Google, I would have laughed.
Also, on a total side note, if you told me 5 years ago that Bing would be a serious threat to Google, I would have laughed. If you had told me 3 months ago that Bing would be a serious threat to Google, I still would have laughed. That's how much impact the chat integration had for Bing, overnight.
Google has spent the last 10 years ago making Google worse. They achieved this in large part by making the whole internet worse. Zero. But a search engine with results of the quality of Google 10 years ago would be a serious competitor. Zero, for example, Google used to have a fairly strictly enforced rule that indexable content had to actually be visible to an unauthenticated user. The current crop of sites that have apparently useful content in snippets, but that hide it when loaded, would have been penalized, possibly severely.
I was not at all surprised, to be honest. Chat took over about 90 to 95% of what I would previously resort to Google. Since Microsoft was dealing cards at OpenAI, it was just a matter of time.
How do you manage the hallucination problems, or do you not seem to be having them? I'm blown away by the competence of the language model, but its willingness to make up facts makes me leery.
I can't tell if your sarcasm is top-notch, but isn't Chromebooks and Docs, sheets, slides, exactly the thing you describe?
That's a stripped-down OS running only a web browser and a bunch of web apps, not a real OS. Another one of those Google fantasies that failed to understand normal people.
Where do you see Chromeos and Google Office as falling flat in that regard? Desktops are pretty smaller in market size compared to laptops these days.
By desktop app, they don't mean an app that runs on desktop computers only. They mean an app that runs locally and not web-based. Office 365 Desktop versus Office 365 Web Portal. Google doesn't offer anything but web-based.
I'm not sure that would have changed anything though. Their main loss is that Chromeos isn't marketed as business-oriented. But that's probably because you can't market it to businesses when tons of legacy software doesn't run. And accountants still tend to prefer Excel over Sheets, in my experience. But when businesses do use workspace products, it's not an issue that it all happens within the browser.
Google Docs, etc. are totally eating into Microsoft Office's market share. I can't remember the last company I was at where they expected us to use Microsoft Office products. But we used Google Docs, Sheets, etc. constantly.
Just buy Canonical or something. Canonical doesn't really make any things that are considered part of a desktop OS. Ubuntu is just a package, and some argue a bad one, of things made by other people. There's very little value in the Linux desktop, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. You're probably best reinventing the wheel if you want a Windows competitor, like Google did with Chromeos.
What's Sunder's goal for Google? They seem to be aimless since he took the helm.
That's exactly what I think. I personally also find him very uninspiring. It looks like he's basically just maintaining the company on autopilot mode. No out-of-the-world new ideas. And now the company is losing on the very field they were seemingly far ahead than the rest of the world.
1. It will reportedly be known as Project Magi, and is said to provide a far more personalized experience than the company's current service. That is super creepy. Google knows a lot about you, and now it is using that knowledge to really put you in a filter bubble. Imagine this plus engagement metrics. 2. So much for that monopoly a lot of people thought Google had. Turns out they're still as exposed to market pressure as they ever were.
The last thing anyone should ever want from a search engine is different results from the next person over.
That might be true in concept, but I don't think it's true in reality. When people search for something online, they want the first result to be whatever they had in mind. If I search for Python, I want the homepage for the programming language. When somebody else searches for Python, they might be looking to learn about the animal. You could argue that we should just ask for exactly what we want, but that puts more work on the user and reduces the effectiveness of the tool. I don't want to type more than Python, I just want the link. Search engines provide very little personalization even today. I'm almost surprised a competitor hasn't popped up with a product that tries to fill that niche.
I've been using Bing for a few weeks now. It is not all the way there yet, but so far the experience is more gratifying than Google. The results seem to be better, and there is less ads on top the search results. Their AI integration is also well accomplished. No complaints there.
Google constant failure astonish me. How a company with so much money, so many wonderful engineers, can't produce a source of income other than the search engine. I kept reading news about Google's AI programs. How the hell was Microsoft with OpenAI that came up with the biggest hit in AI? Also, how does Google want people to use their new services if they keep closing them down after their failure, aka Google completely forgetting about them and proceeding to close them down?
What makes them wonderful engineers? The vast majority are very smart and obviously can code leak code like no tomorrow. But that doesn't make them wonderful. Remember when the person who created Homebrew couldn't get a job at Google? That person created software used by a lot of people. He saw something that needed fixing, and he fixed it. He fixed it so well a bunch of other people started using his fix. That's a wonderful engineer. Created a project used and loved by many people. That's the kind of person you want helping to create products at your company. Google puts so much emphasis on coding skills that aren't needed for the majority of the work done, and doesn't emphasize selecting for the ability to create things that people want to use. I also find the coding skills selection kind of amusing, since they had to create a simplified programming language, Go, because so many of their leet coding new graduates couldn't handle C correctly. Perhaps being able to leet code in your sleep doesn't really make you a wonderful engineer either.
Google is not going anywhere, and they will easily replicate anything OpenAI does. It's not that magical. Why they still rely on search advertising is well known. Replacing a 150 billion source of revenue is not a simple thing. It's like trying to replace everything people do in a mid-sized rich country with something else. And compared to Facebook, which is still 99% dependent on ads, Google is much more diversified. Total revenue is north of 250 billion. They have cloud, YouTube, Docs, Google Play, all the alphabet experiments, etc. And most importantly, half the world's online advertising, exchanges, auctions, etc. uses Google ad tech. So Google is not going anywhere. They just look at the world through a very different lens due to their size. I'm guessing they don't see the point of keeping businesses that produce a few hundred million in revenue running, because they really need businesses that produce a few hundred billion to keep all their free stuff. Search, email, chat, Chrome, Android, video, R&D for other stuff, etc. afloat.